This exercise right here, known as Lewit by some or 90-90 by others, is often programmed to teach basic breathing mechanics, improve overall mobility, and reduce pain. It's a popular one, and it's a movement I used to use a lot. The key word there is used to. You see, as I've refined my process and order of operation movement-wise over the years, I found that there are some inherent limitations by starting people with this specific exercise. In this video, I'm going to teach you why this should not be a starting exercise, what you should do instead, and if you stick around to the end, I'll show you how you can actually use this exercise later on in your progressions, but in a different way to improve your mobility. The first reason I don't use this exercise as much is because of the hip flexion demands. When you do this exercise, you have to have at least 90 degrees of hip flexion to prevent any undesirable movement compensations. But there's a problem. Most people do not have that amount of hip flexion without creating an orientation or a posterior tilt through the pelvis and the lumbar spine. That's not what we want to see under normal hip flexion biomechanics. Instead, what should happen as we flex the hip is the sacrum should turn towards that side, but it's a small amount of movement that happens. If you see someone rounding their back as you perform hip flexion, you're not really getting the movement changes that you desire at the pelvis. Instead, you're just moving the back. If someone doesn't have that motion available, how are they going to get there? They're going to cheat. If you cheat, that's going to limit the efficacy of the exercise. The second reason I've moved away from this exercise is the order at which you should target movement restrictions. At 90 degrees of hip flexion, there is more internal rotation occurring, and that's according to this study right here by Newman. Well, so what? Don't you need internal rotation? You do, but you need a different movement first. Our body moves generally through two rotations. External rotation, which is the increasing of available space and motion. So when you externally rotate your body, there's more space available for you to move. And then internal rotation is the compression of that space, which is how we basically move and put force into the ground. This exercise is targeting internal rotation, but it presupposes that you have external rotation available. A lot of individuals don't. And that's another reason why oftentimes during this exercise, people will get a posterior tilt or orientation through the lumbar spine as opposed to gaining range of motion at the pelvis. The third reason is the posterior pelvic tilt or tuck that is coached with the exercise. Earlier in my channel, I used to be all about tucking the hips. Some might say I was a bad mother tucker, but I've moved away from that for a few different reasons. The first reason is because it's quite difficult to differentiate moving only the pelvis from the lower back. A lot of individuals, when they perform a posterior tilt, end up moving through the spine. And sometimes you can't visually pick this up. And if my goal by programming specific breathing movements is to improve the dynamics of the pelvis, which can influence femoral or hip range of motion, I want to try to minimize variables that will not help me reach that goal. Orienting through the lumbar spine is one of those variables, and you can often get improvements in mobility without tucking the hips. And practically with my patients and clients, I've found it easier to coach when you don't do that. A lot of times individuals will overemphasize the tuck when they first learn some of this stuff, and then they gloss over what's arguably more important, the breathing sequence. It is the breathing sequence that's really going to maximize the mobility in the pelvis and the thorax. So if we don't want to be doing this type of movement in the beginning, what should we do instead? Now, the key with all these moves is you want to have ground contact or weight through the following 3 points. First is going to be your PSIS, which is the bony part that is right above the pelvis. That should stay in contact with the ground. The next is the inside heel, and then the third point is the base of the big toe. With these points contacting, we can create expansion in the pelvis, and it allows us to put force into the ground while limiting that lumbar flexion thing that I was talking about with that move. A better starting point is the supine hip extension move. You're gonna need a foam roller, and you're gonna put one foot atop the foam roller. The other foot is gonna be on the ground, relaxed. You wanna see if you can sense those bony parts that are above the pelvis, the PSIS. If you can't, you don't want to tuck to get it, you're better off bending that knee that's on the wall a little bit more. A lot of times that will create the rock back needed to create the position. From here, stay heavy on those points. You want to get a little bit of weight into the wall, pushing through the inner heel and the base of the big toe. Where we can get the external rotation is offloading this leg. You can grip it with your arm. You don't want to pull it well beyond 90 because chances are you probably don't have it. But once you do that, you're probably going to be feeling your hamstring working pretty solidly. It's not going to be a crazy amount, but you should have awareness that this muscle is contracting. From here, silent in through the nose, soft exhale through the mouth, not all the way. You'll want to do 3 to 5 sets of 5 breaths 2 times per day for 2 to 4 weeks with that move. It's really good at improving external rotation. And then with the wall push leg, you should actually see a slight increase in your internal rotation. I would then progress to hook lying. Now, you can do this on the ground, or if you have a tough time getting those backbone contacts, I would do this on a raised surface. Just make sure it's firm. Put a ball between your knees. Again, emphasize the same points. You're gonna get PSIS contact, gently get heavy through the inner heel and the base of the big toe without bridging up or tucking. Once I keep that pressure evenly between my foot and my backbones, I'm gonna hold this position and breathe silently in through the nose, soft exhale through the mouth. This will allow you to recapture some internal rotation, but it's going to be within a range of hip flexion that you likely have. Just make sure that when you're doing it, you're not tipping the feet inward to get the foot contacts. You want it to be a straight down pressure. You'll want to do 3 to 5 sets of 5 breaths 2 times per day for 2 to 4 weeks with that move. Once you've mastered those 2 moves and you've gained some hip flexion, now would be the time to drive something like the Lewit or 90-90. But I would coach it a bit differently than it's typically coached to ensure that you're not flexing through the lower back and you're actually gaining the hip internal rotation that you oh so desire. And the cues, you guessed it folks, are the exact same as the prior movements. You're going to lie on your back, 90-degree angle at the hip and knees, ball between the knees. You want to make sure you keep the PSIS or backbone contact. You're going to gently get some weight into the wall, which should engage the hamstrings. Just make sure you're not rocking the hips or losing the backbone contact. Hold this position, breathe silently in through the nose, soft exhale through the mouth. If you notice that you're having a tough time getting the back of the legs work, I would just lift one leg off. That should get the hamstrings engaged quite a bit more, which will improve your mobility gains. And because of these mobility demands and the way it's coached, that's why I've moved away from the Lewit / 90-90 exercise as a starting point. I think there are way better exercises to start patients and clients with. In fact, this video right here goes into my top 5. If you can master these, it's going to take care of a lot of issues and give you a foundation for more advanced moves.